In 1876, Bradford, Pennsylvania had become a booming oil town, and naturally many railroads wanted to establish themselves in the area to capitalize on the demand for transport of drilling equipment, oil, and passengers. The problem was the land was notoriously muddy, which often made it extremely difficult to traverse. In order to tackle the mud, the Bradford and Foster Brook Railway felt that rather than using a conventional railway system, a monorail would be a much better solution. As it turned out, it wasn't. During the US Centennial International Exhibition of 1876, General Leroy Stone presented his monorail design as a transport solution to the people of Pennsylvania. Known as the Saddleback Monorail, Stone's design was quite similar to the Lartigue Monorail, entailing a single load-bearing rail mounted on top of wooden A-frames with two additional guide rails mounted lower down on the frames on both sides. The engine and carriage straddled the rails, with the main driving wheels running along the top rail and an extra set of wheels mounted lower down running along the guide rails to help improve stability. The locomotive used a rotary steam engine instead of conventional cylinders to power its wheels, and while nowhere near as efficient as traditional cylinders, it didn't matter too much as the engine only hauled one carriage on what was essentially a demonstration line. The carriage had two levels, with seating above and either side of the load-bearing rail, and was quite ornate in its design. While not exactly a revolutionary leap in railway design, it certainly had its advantages in Pennsylvania. Because the rails were raised above as opposed to laid on the ground, the monorail wouldn't run directly over the muddy terrain. On top of that, Stone's monorail worked out significantly cheaper to build than a conventional narrow-gauge railway. As such, when building their line between Bradford and Fostertown, the Bradford and Foster Brook Railway decided to use a modified version of Stone's monorail design instead of a conventional narrow-gauge railway. Construction began in October 1877. Piles were driven into the ground and connected via 12-foot square timbers, with the main load-bearing rails set on top and the guide rails positioned 3 foot below. Similar to Lartigue's design, sections of rail mounted on hinges served as points, and where crossings were necessary, the line could be swung open like a gate. Nicknamed the Old Peg Leg Railway, it officially opened in 1878, totaling 4 miles in length, with each mile of track supposedly only costing $3,000 to lay. The first locomotive to be employed on the line was strange, having 2 boilers straddling either side of the central rail and having its wheels driven by a rotary engine instead of cylinders. It was described as looking like a giant pair of boots swung over a clothesline, and supposedly could run on the line at 30 miles an hour. It was also quite unreliable and quickly became worn out, and so the railway soon invested in another engine. This too had 2 boilers, but unlike the other engine, used more conventional cylinders to power its wheels instead of a rotary engine. These 2 were the only locomotives running the line for a long time, with the railway operating 10 double trips a day, pulling freight and eventually passengers, though I will say, not very well. The new engine's wheels had a tendency to ruin rails as it ran over them, causing the tracks to break during its 4th run on the line. In another accident in August 1878, the rails broke while the new engine was pulling some flatbeds out of the depot, causing 2 of the flatbeds to derail. In fact, the rails and the engines were so faulty that an accident was recorded almost daily. I can also imagine that, similar to the Lartigue monorail, passenger carriages and freight cars would have been awkward, as an even number of passengers or cargo would have to be on both sides of the cars in order to keep them balanced. Lartigue's monorail was also notorious for slipping in wet weather too, something I imagine the Bradford Railway would have suffered from given their similarities. The railway, despite its flaws, managed to carry on operating for a full year before it went out with a bang. Literally. It seems 2 new engines were ordered for the line, one from Gibbs and Sterrett and the other from Baldwin. The Gibbs and Sterrett engine arrived on the line sometime in January 1879, following a similar twin-boiler layout as the other engines on the railway. The boilers were second-hand, but had been tested before being sent off. On the 27th of January, the engine was steamed and taken for a trial run, towing a flat car carrying a handful of railway officials. During the run, one of the boilers ran dry and ended up exploding, causing the train to derail and crash into the nearby creek. Out of everyone aboard, only 3 passengers survived the incident, and it's regarded as one of the worst accidents in monorail history. The line was closed shortly afterwards, with the rails and wood swiftly being pulled up and sold off. Several attempts were made to relay the route with a conventional narrow gauge line, but none ever made it past the planning stage. What happened to the engine built by Baldwin is unknown, but it's likely it was either scrapped or rebuilt. Whatever you want to blame it on, the fact that it wasn't a conventional railway, that the line was likely built cheaply, or that they just didn't invest enough in their locomotives, the Bradford and Foster Brook Railway was undoubtedly a failure. Is there a timeline where the railway worked out fine in the end? Who knows? But let this be a lesson that a few rails, timbers, and strange locomotives doesn't necessarily a good railway make. Subscribe for more.